much for joining us. Today we're doing a real special webcast. We're here presenting with Jennifer Goss. Jennifer's a social studies teacher at Robert E. Lee High School in Virginia, where she's taught since 2012. She currently teaches a Holocaust and Genocide elective in addition to AP U.S. Government and Politics and U.S. and Virginia history. Prior to this, Jennifer taught for 10 years at Fleetwood Area High School in Pennsylvania, where she taught 2 Holocaust electives, an introductory history course, and a co-taught course entitled The History of the Holocaust Through Film and Literature. It was through her involvement in this latter course that Jennifer, her colleagues and students, worked to create the award-winning, Emmy-nominated documentary film, Misa's Feud. In addition to her work, which we'll be talking about today, with the Echoes and Reflections and her work with classroom teaching, Jennifer is a USHMM Teacher Fellow and member of the USHMM Regional Education Corps, an elite group of teachers that assist the museum. That's the U.S. Jennifer?
Holocaust Memorial Museum.
U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. So they assist the museum with educational program initiatives and teacher training. And so we're so lucky to have such a distinguished teacher with us here today. And Jennifer is going to be talking about some materials and some resources for using the Holocaust in a National History Day project. All these resources and materials are posted at the New Mexico Humanities Council website at nmhum.org/historyday, and go look under NHD theme for teacher resources. These links are also up on the YouTube page for this broadcast. And if you have any questions for Jennifer, please feel free to email me at historyday@nmhum.org, or use the chat on the YouTube broadcast page. And you should see it in the upper right of the page. And just feel free to chat, and we'll keep the questions for the end, unless Jennifer wants to just hear from people as things come up.
That's fine.
Okay, that sounds great. So without any further ado, Jennifer, I'm going to pass it on to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. And I'm going to go ahead and start us with our screen share, and we'll get started. All right, can you see the presentation on my screen?
Looks great.
All right. So my name is, Ellen told you, is Jennifer Goss, and I'm a trainer with Echoes and Reflections. And I'm looking forward to sharing with you today how Echoes and Reflections can help both educators and students explore and learn more about taking a stand, this year's National History Day theme. And we'll be giving you a little bit of background on the Echoes program and how it can be best utilized for your individual settings. So to begin, our goals for tonight are to introduce you to the pedagogy of Echoes and Reflections and give you some guidelines for effective planning and implementation for Holocaust education with this specific setting in mind. We're also going to be familiarizing you with the print and digital contents of Echoes, particularly how they can supplement National History Day. And with that, we're going to be exploring Echoes and Reflections multimedia assets, including the correlated visual history testimonies from the USC Shoah Foundation, one of our partners, as well as the variety of additional primary resources and materials that are available. And we'll be talking about some of the experiential activities that students can do to gain greater knowledge and some ideas for discussion. And hopefully along the way, we'll also be enhancing your knowledge about the Holocaust. I just wanted to make a quick mention that I know as educators, we're asked to meet a lot of different standards, many that are specific to our states, but of course also the Common Core state standards. And this particular set of standards on the screen deals with our first lesson, lesson 1, but also we have for each of our lessons, we have standards that are correlated to the Common Core, and so that's also beneficial as you're working with your students to study this particular content. National History Day, of course, this year's topic is taking a stand, or I should say for 2017. And we're going to talk tonight about how students can explore this topic, beginning with secondary sources and then delving into primary sources like every year's National History Theme Book recommends. Of course, taking a stand means adopting a firm position, either through force or words or even economic power. And there's examples of all of these things interwoven throughout the history of the Holocaust. And so how people move from merely opposing Nazi Germany to taking a stand in some way against the Nazi regime. And so as we're exploring the resources, I'll be talking about some of the different angles that you and your students can take in utilizing the era of the Holocaust to further explore taking a stand in history. Just a couple of things to consider when helping your students to learn about the Holocaust. Learning about the Holocaust is oftentimes a very deep and challenging topic. And so it's important that we're able to lead our students safely into studying this topic area and then also leading them safely out. Even though much of the work for National History Day is done independently outside of our classrooms in most of our schools, we still need to make sure that we're checking in with students and providing them a solid foundation for them not only to better learn the history, but also to grapple with it effectively in an emotional context. And so these are just a couple of the recommendations that we give to educators from Echoes and Reflections. If you actually have a copy of our full Teacher's Resource Guide, which I'll talk about a little bit later in our program, you would find these guidelines on page 19. It's important to provide students with proper context. Students need to understand that the Holocaust didn't happen in a vacuum. Also, when studying about taking a stand during the Holocaust, it's important for students to understand the proper context that those particular decisions were made in. Many times students look at isolated incidents in history without full contextual understanding, and this can sometimes misshape their perceptions of people's choices. It's also important to encourage both ourselves and our students to use specific language. Not all Nazis that collaborated with the German government and others who collaborated with the German government were German. Not all Germans were Nazis. And so understanding this will help our students better recognize, again, the human choices that were made during this time period. We also need to be careful not to simplify the history. Taking a stand under the Nazi regime was an incredibly powerful thing to do, but it was something that was not very common. And students need to be able to understand why it was not commonplace. And we need to make sure that we give them the tools to unpack and recognize when people did take a stand, why it was a very complicated and complex choice. We also want to encourage students to translate statistics into people. The number of 6 million Jewish victims during this era and millions of others is often overwhelming to students. And so we want to make sure that we provide students with the stories for them to understand that the individuals who were victimized during the Holocaust and those who survived began this era as human beings with hopes, dreams, lives, and families. And so again, that element of the human story and how it factors into decisions that people made. And lastly, we want to make sure that we avoid comparisons of pain. Students, as well as adults, have a tendency to generalize and also to compare. And every tragedy in our history, national and world, is a unique tragedy. So we want to make sure that students avoid comparing them because they're all unique and deserve their own unique recognition. It's okay to make connections, but we want to make sure we avoid comparisons. Now that we've gotten that basic groundwork on how to help your students study the Holocaust, I do want to mention our Teacher's Resource Guide. Any educator who takes part in a 3-hour or more Echoes and Reflections training, whether it's face-to-face or online, and we do have online trainings coming up in the next few months, gets a copy of our $100 Echoes and Reflections Teacher Resource Guide for free. The guide has 10 components, and you could literally begin with lesson 1 and work your way all the way through lesson 10 if you have that time availability. Or if you're a more experienced educator or somebody who's working on a shorter time frame, the guide also works well to pick and choose from various components of the guide, almost in like a salad bar type of approach. I've been using these materials for over 10 years in my own classroom, and I strongly recommend them to any educator. Tonight's program is going to focus specifically on lessons 6 and 7, which deal with the topics of Jewish resistance, as well as rescuers and non-Jewish resistance. And although normally the full lessons are only available in our Teacher's Resource Guide, I know that Ellen has made these materials specially available for you on the New Mexico National History Day website. So you owe her a great round of thanks for arranging to have those lessons available for us. What I'm going to do now is detour to the Echoes and Reflections site, and I'm going to show you some various components of this site, which will work well both for you to share directly with your students, and these resources are also available for students to explore on their own. I'm going to head to that page now, and so hopefully our screen will stay with us. Ellen, if it doesn't switch to the site, please let me know. Right now I'm on the main Echoes and Reflections page, which you can find at echoesandreflections.org. And you'll want to direct your students to head directly to this lesson components section. And that's also where you will find resources that can directly help you both in and out of the classroom. A few points of interest here. In our upper right-hand corner, we have some basic resources that can be used as search tools and also to provide better context for you and your students in studying the Holocaust within the context of taking a stand. In the upper right-hand corner here, we have our visual history clips by lesson. This is a really great reference to see all of the visual history clips that are available here on the Echoes and Reflections website. If you get a copy of the Teacher Resource Guide, these clips are also available in a DVD within the Teacher Resource Guide in case you ever have any technology difficulties. But looking here at the visual history clips, in our 4th column, you can see there is a description of the clips. And so if a student wants to know more about some specific topics of the Holocaust and wants to hear about them through the power of visual history testimony, which we'll discuss in a short while, you can go down through this 4th column and see the variety of pieces that are available as well as their length. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking specifically at lessons 6 and 7 tonight. And you can see here that lesson 6 contains 5 different clips related to various topics of Jewish resistance. And we also have 6 clips related to the topic of rescue and non-Jewish resistance. And we'll actually be seeing some of those clips as part of our program this evening. And so you can also see there are other aspects of the Holocaust profiled that, again, although they're not part of the lesson 6 and 7 pieces, they may be applicable to a particular topic that your students choose to utilize for National History Day. Our second general resource here is our glossary. This is a great resource because you can just simply click on the URL and copy it and paste into Google Classroom or onto a Google site or whatever resource you're having your students use. As students are studying the topic of the Holocaust, they haven't studied it extensively. They may come across words that they don't understand, and the glossary provides a great resource for them to be able to better identify the words that they encounter. And then our third general resource is our timeline. The timeline, again, may help students fill in some of the gaps for the stories that they're exploring on taking a stand. Obviously, acts of rescue mainly don't occur until after World War II itself begins, but there are political, social, and economic events that lead up to that era that might be necessary for students to better understand in order to recognize the choices that individuals made when they take a stand. Now, as mentioned, tonight's program is going to focus specifically on the topics of Jewish resistance, as well as rescue and non-Jewish resistance. We're going to first begin with the topic of Jewish resistance. When individuals think about the topic of resistance during the Holocaust, many people automatically think one of two things. They either think, why didn't the Jews fight back? Or they think about the few isolated incidences of violent resistance that occurred, such as the Sonderkommando uprising in Auschwitz-Birkenau in October of 1944, or the Warsaw Ghetto uprising that occurred in April of 1943. But there were many other ways that individuals took a stand and resisted the Nazi regime during the Holocaust. As mentioned, the National History Day program first encourages our students to look at secondary sources to gather information before using that information to analyze various primary resources. There are two specific secondary sources that are available for echoes and reflections in this particular unit. The first one is an informational text here on partisans. I'm going to click on that right now just to show it to you very briefly so you can see the layout of it. Partisans were armed units in areas dominated by Nazi Germany during World War II. Partisan units were usually mixed. That means that not all of the individuals who were a part of them were actually Jewish, with few exceptions. In many cases, individuals joined partisan units not because of their faith, but because of their political beliefs. And in some cases, some of the partisan units were actually anti-Semitic and did not allow Jews to be a part of them. One specific partisan unit that many students are familiar with is the Bielski brothers, who were a partisan unit in Belarusia that actually saved over 1,200 Jewish men, women, and children, most of whom were non-fighters during World War II. And so this unit, this particular secondary source piece, not only provides them with an overview, but also provides them with photographs with some primary sources to help engage them better in understanding the magnitude of the decision that the Bielski brothers made to take a stand during the Holocaust. Although there are not testimonies from any of the Bielski brothers actually in the Echoes and Reflections program, I will be showing you in a short while another way that you can access visual history testimony, primary sources that can help students who choose to pursue this particular partisan topic. If you're interested in the role of partisans, you can study that further along the visual history testimony angle. The other secondary source piece is here 2 spaces below, and it is on armed resistance in the ghettos and camps. Again, many individuals often think of resistance as being active, or some call it violent resistance. This particular handout discusses and provides secondary source background on the armed resistance that occurred in ghettos within Nazi-occupied Europe, as well as concentration and death camps, in particular mentioning resistance in extermination camps such as Auschwitz-Birkenau and Treblinka. If a student would choose to pursue this angle of taking a stand, one of the primary sources that they might be particularly interested in is this pronouncement by Abba Kovner. As you can see here, the pronouncement by Abba Kovner is short but very powerful. As you read through it, it shares with you some of the mindset of the individuals who were in the Vilna ghetto during the period of the Holocaust. And it also shares with you their actual mindset towards why they chose to take a stand and resist those who were determined to kill them. Another primary source piece that provides a different angle to the concept of taking a stand is this top primary source piece on cultural and spiritual resistance. This is an aspect of taking a stand that many people don't consider when they're initially thinking about the topic of the Holocaust. Although many of the individuals who resisted culturally and spiritually also met an untimely death, like those who chose to resist actively in a more violent fashion, these individuals had a very powerful determination to take a stand against their Nazi oppressors. There are some examples here from various ghettos. The top one discusses the existence of individuals in the Litzmannstadt or Lodz ghetto, as it was called, and how just the aspect of writing down one's perceptions of life in the ghetto was a way of taking a stand. The Nazis did not want record of what they were doing to these individuals unless it was record that they created themselves. So the very action of writing down one's thoughts and one's belief can be a powerful way to take a stand against those who are oppressing you. This piece focuses on topics such as the obligatory registration of musical instruments, the desire to obtain books, which oftentimes were banned from many of the ghetto areas, ways to get additional food, as well as ways to worship, things that many times we and our students take for granted because we have easy access to these items. But during the era of the Holocaust, many things that we take for granted were actually banned for the Jewish victim. And so the desire, the determination to take a stand against the oppressor and still obtain these items or still practice these religious beliefs or still practice the possibility of obtaining an education were all powerful and lesser known aspects during the Holocaust that individuals were still taking a stand in different ways. What I would like to do now is actually share with you a clip from one of the individuals who chose to take a stand. This is Helen Fagan, and she was born in 1922. So when the war began, she was 17 years old, and she was born in Poland. And it tells us here that her interview was conducted in Sarasota, Florida in February of 1996. And if you want to learn more about Helen, you can actually also click on the more extensive biography that's available under her name. Certainly when compiling your National History Day project, whichever angle you choose to pursue, having additional background information on visual history testimonies that you feature within it is very important. One of the best practices in using visual history testimony. So looking at this biographical profile here, you can see that she was born to a family that had multiple children. She had an older sister and a younger sister. And she also attended college at Jagiellonian University in Krakow and discusses the experience of going to school there and then how her life changes when she becomes part of the ghetto. And she is put into a ghetto rather shortly into the Holocaust, just a few months after Nazi Germany invades Poland on September 1st, 1939. So let's listen to what Helen has to say here about a different form of resistance in taking a stand.
Jennifer, I'm not sure that our computers have enough bandwidth to pull all that through with the video and everything.
I'm sorry, Ellen, what was that?
Oh, I'm just saying I'm not sure our computers, our little computers, have enough power to pull all the video through and broadcast that. It wasn't quite playing.
Okay. Unfortunately, then I guess we'll have to skip the testimony.
Well, I really encourage people to watch it on their own. It's
okay. So it
takes.
If you're interested, obviously, in exploring the testimony further, it is available here on the Echoes and Reflections site, and you simply go to the lesson component section down to this segment on Jewish resistance, and then you would pick Helen's testimony here out of the middle column. This particular clip talks about operating a clandestine school for children in the ghetto. And I think this is a really powerful thing for students to explore with the concept of taking a stand, because so many students in our schools don't necessarily recognize the value and privilege of education while they're receiving it. And I think it's a really great piece to further explore in how education was so tremendously important, especially when it was not available, and in her case, not even permitted. And so the fact that Helen, among others in this ghetto, took a stand to continue to offer education to individuals. So again, I would strongly recommend that you do take a look at that particular piece. The final thing I want to mention here regarding the topic of Jewish resistance and the Holocaust is this last column. This last column deals with our Reflect and Respond segment. Reflect and Respond gives you some additional things to think about or discuss with your students, and it might stimulate some further exploration on taking a stand that could make a great topic for National History Day. And so perhaps the concept of taking a stand in a different fashion than many people traditionally associate with the Holocaust, or taking a stand, as the bottom question guides you towards, to think about the preservation of things like culture and traditions and customs, and how they also have a tremendous impact on one's identity, and so why taking a stand towards that can be tremendously important. There's also a great autobiographical excerpt from the book On Both Sides of the Wall, written by Vladka Mead. Vladka Mead was a Jewish woman who was able to disguise herself as a Pole in the city of Warsaw, and she also worked with the Polish resistance in the city of Warsaw, the Zagoda, to help smuggle individuals out of the ghetto, generally children. And she did this with the assistance of some false papers. And so Vladka Mead is an amazing individual to better explore, because she not only took a stand against her Nazi oppressors and lived under a false identity, but she also took a stand and aided other individuals in escaping from the ghetto. If you've ever heard the story of Irina Sendler, who was a nurse during this time period, who helped to save individuals that were in the ghetto, children, and she buried their names in jars, the story My Life in a Jar, which would also be a great topic to explore. Vladka was one of the individuals that worked with her. So do check this piece out if you're interested more in exploring that aspect of resistance. There's also a song that the partisans sang called Never Say. And so exploring this topic of how songs and music motivated individuals to take a stand and stand up to their oppressors is also powerful, as is an exhibition from our partner Yad Vashem called Heartstrings, which contains music of the partisans during this time period. And then finally, in our supplemental assets, there are also other topics to explore related to the topic of Jewish resistance. And Ellen, do we have a question?
Jennifer, yeah, I wanted to I think we lost your screen share when the video stopped. So could you just turn that screen share back on and just show us with your mouse the area that you're talking about?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
That's okay.
The story is so compelling, it's hard to interrupt. And yeah, that book's My Story in a Jar is amazing.
Are we back?
Yeah, absolutely. Looks great.
Great. So the column I was referencing here was this last column. The reflect and respond questions that I mentioned are here in the top, and there's just 3 brief questions that stimulate student thinking in different directions related to the topic of Jewish resistance. And then we also have our Making Connections section, which suggests some additional ways that students can explore, including other underground movements, not Jewish, but related to other countries and ethnic groups that stood up to the Nazis. And then also mentioning that excerpt On Both Sides of the Wall, which is located just below here, and also the concept of exploring music as a form of taking a stand against oppression. And there's also great connections to the Gilder Lehrman site, which I know many of you are familiar with. There's also mention here as well of different ways that Japanese Americans during World War II took a stand and resisted against some of their treatment, and some additional resources of Hollywood films to explore related to these topics. And then the song Never Say is here, and the exhibition from Yad Vashem located just below it. And then supplemental assets is our last feature here, which gives some additional ideas or topics to explore concerning Jewish resistance, including the names of some individuals who would make great explorations for National History Day. Particularly if you're looking for strong female individuals in history, I would certainly recommend looking at Rosa Rabota, who was an individual who assisted the Sonderkommando uprising in Auschwitz-Birkenau and then ultimately paid the price of her life. But she certainly took a stand against those who were oppressing her in that position. So if there are any questions on the topic of Jewish resistance, I'm certainly happy to entertain them now. Ellen, just feel free to chime in if there are any.
I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of them is, shoot, I don't know what. One of them is, what, with the Echoes and Reflections timeline, is that searchable?
The Echoes and Reflections timeline searchable. That's actually a great question. I believe it is not searchable. I'm just going to reference it right now. It is not searchable in a traditional sense, but what I would do is I would use the Control F. And then, of course, it's all available on the same page, so you could then get some hits on the page itself. Like, for example, I mentioned the Sonderkommando uprising, and so I just typed in Sonderkommando, and it takes us down here to October 7th. So it's searchable in that way, but we don't actually have a search feature.
Thank you. The second question here is, what keywords would a student use if they were searching for topics related to cultural and spiritual resistance?
That's also a really great question. I would use keywords. If they're searching a Holocaust-specific site, I would use keywords like art, music, religion, Judaism, and even searching for some of the high holidays like Yom HaShoah, and Rosh Hashanah. They may get hits on those particular topics and how individuals sought to preserve their religious traditions. Searching for school, education, even library would return some hits on sites associated with the Holocaust that are related to spiritual resistance. For middle school students that are exploring the topic of the Holocaust, I would particularly recommend that they look for examples of artistic resistance, because there were many children their age during the Holocaust who created art in resistance to what was being done to them. And there's a great book out there called I Never Saw Another Butterfly that features children's art and poetry from the Terezin or Theresienstadt ghetto, which was located 100 kilometers north of Prague. And so that would be a great exploration, particularly for a middle school student interested in this topic. So
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Any other questions on the topic of Jewish resistance?
I don't have any more right now.
Okay. Probably a better known topic is the topic of rescue during the Holocaust. And of course, many of us are familiar with the story of Oskar Schindler, but Schindler was just one individual who made the decision to rescue. There are so many other individuals out there who made similar decisions, and they are not as well known. I referenced, of course, in our Jewish resistance component, the story of Irina Sendler, but there are many others that we could talk about as well. And so to give students some secondary source background, again, shifting back to that exploring secondary sources first and then delving into primary sources as National History Day recommends, we can see our Those Who Dared to Rescue piece, which was actually just recently revised for our new version of the Teacher Resource Guide. And it begins here with this incredibly powerful quote, which talks about those who had the courage to care, who had the courage to take a stand. And it goes into the explanation of rescue and why people chose to rescue. And of course, there were many different reasons. And so it's important for students to consider when they're exploring individuals who rescued and took a stand, what their motivations were in doing so. It might be better to pick individuals who were motivated for more altruistic reasons to take a stand than perhaps focusing on individuals who might have been motivated for economic reasons or for more manipulative purposes, because those individuals too unfortunately existed during the Holocaust. So using resources from Echoes and Reflections, they focus on those individuals who took a stand for altruistic purposes, truly moved from, the concept of not wanting to go along with this, from wanting to oppose to actively taking a stand, not moving from opposition to convenience into taking a stand. And that's really important for students to understand. Some individuals that chose to rescue chose to do so for religious or moral reasons. For others, it was a decision that initially started on the spur of the moment. Their neighbor was in danger and they chose to help them. And so I think either one of those avenues, whether it's a conscious, long thought out choice or a decision on the spur of the moment, can both be powerful for students to explore. And it goes through groups of individuals like the Zagota, who I previously mentioned, as well as single individuals. Some of you may be familiar with the story of Raoul Wallenberg, the Swedish diplomat in Budapest, who chose to issue papers to individuals in Budapest to help ensure their safety. Sugihara was actually a Japanese diplomat who is lesser known, but also saved a significant number of individuals during this era, as well as Sousa Mendes, who hailed from Portugal. And of course, we make mention of Oskar Schindler in this piece as well. And there are some powerful avenues of exploration that you can take with him. But the piece itself gives you a pretty comprehensive overview and mentions a lot of other individuals who chose to rescue or resist the Nazis that we may not be familiar with. Another one who I would highlight here is Jan Karski. And Jan Karski actually traveled all the way to the United States to meet with President Franklin Roosevelt. And in the visual history testimony section of Lesson 7, there is a very powerful testimony from Jan Karski, which shows that even though you may choose to take a stand, others unfortunately may not take the initiative to follow you. And while that is unfortunate, it's a sobering thought. It's something that I think also provides value to the topic. And so although Karski did not get cooperation from Roosevelt despite his assurances, Karski chose to continue to pursue making the world aware of the events of the Holocaust during World War II. And so definitely another great topic area to look at. So this is our extensive secondary source piece for Lesson 7. We also have a chart here which would provide some great background on the concept of righteous among the nations. Yad Vashem officially recognizes individuals who took a stand to save Jews, regardless of whether their attempts were successes and failures. And it goes through the criteria necessary to be recognized as a righteous among the nation, as well as the total number of persons that took a stand and where they hailed from. So this, again, providing some more general background to the topic that may stimulate student interest to then explore it further. And if a student is interested, I would point them right here to the Righteous Among the Nations site. If they want to explore it and have a specific individual that they want to look for, they can look at the database, which is right here. Yad Vashem is our partner located in Jerusalem, Israel. They provided a lot of the primary and secondary source pieces for the Echoes and Reflections Teacher Resource Guide. And you can actually search for a specific rescuer. I'm just going to use here Wallenberg, since we've been discussing him. And we're going to look for him as an individual. And so Raoul Wallenberg, it returns a hit. And when we click on his name, as long as the internet quickly cooperates, it'll provide us with a profile of Mr. Wallenberg and give us further insight into his heroic acts during the Holocaust. And so it gives you personal information. And then another great feature for National History Day, it provides us with some primary source pieces to accompany his story. And so students can utilize these primary source pieces to create their student documentaries, to create their websites or other presentations. We can learn more about his rescue story by clicking on this link, and it provides us with a pretty comprehensive overview on Raoul Wallenberg. And then it also tells us about his unfortunate fate, that he was actually arrested by the Soviets and accused of colluding with the Germans and Axis powers, and then unfortunately died in a Soviet prison in the late 1940s. And so his story is one that is incredibly powerful. And he was actually eventually awarded honorary U.S. citizenship by the United States Congress. And the street in Washington, D.C., where the Holocaust Museum is housed, was actually renamed Raoul Wallenberg Place in his honor. So his story would be an incredible one to illuminate. But if you're not sure who you would like to look at, you can take a look here at this activity, which is a selected list of individuals who were deemed righteous among the nations. And some of them, again, are familiar names: Oskar Schindler, Irina Sendler, Sugihara. I mentioned Jan Karski, Sousa Mendez, Raoul Wallenberg. But others are lesser known. André Trocmé was a pastor in France who organized his village to save the lives of nearly 2,500 children. Leopold Socha saved a family by housing them in the ghettos, in the sewer in Lodz, Poland. And so these are stories that would be tremendous to illuminate, to show how individuals who came from varying socioeconomic backgrounds chose to stand up and help their fellow man during a very difficult time in our world's history. And then we also have additional suggestions here on the right-hand side. Again, we have reflect and respond questions. There's actually a two-part section of them here, thinking about how ordinary people did extraordinary things and the moral choices and challenges that they faced. And then also thinking about, the concept of the Talmud: he who saves one life, it is as though he has preserved the existence of the entire world. And these individuals who took a stand are said to be forever, inscribed in the faith of the Jewish people for helping to preserve even just one life during the Holocaust. And then again, making connections, suggestions, so further extensions to the topic of rescue and resistance. Many of us are familiar with the story of Anne Frank. One of the primary source pieces that is featured in Lesson 7 deals with Miep Gies, discussing the legacy of Anne Frank. And so legacy being another important theme another important topic connected to the themes of National History Day. This concept of a lasting legacy left by individuals who chose to take a stand. And even though Anne Frank herself did not survive, the actions of Miep Gies did allow for Anne's father to survive the war eventually, because she prolonged his life until they were arrested and taken out of the secret annex. And although Anne herself did not survive, Miep does ultimately recover her diary. And so she preserves in a different way Anne's word from this era. And then there's some further suggestions on topics like Kindertransport, which was the transport of children from Nazi-occupied Austria, as well as Germany and Czechoslovakia, that went to England. And then also there's some additional features of having you geographically explore where these individuals who took a stand came from. So these are just a few suggestions related to the topic of rescue. Again, if there's any questions, Ellen, on this particular topic, I'm happy to entertain them now before we get into our final component.
Oh, sure. I do have another couple of questions come in. So just looking at the list of the righteous among nations, the top one on the list is Poland. Are there resources for, so there are two parts. One is, are there resources for dealing with the Polish language documents, or documents that might be in foreign language? I'm going to expand on that. But also, does Poland have a national archive that could be searched, or any, I don't know. This may be beyond your ability to answer.
Well, we do all of the resources that are made available through Yad Vashem, which are pretty extensive, related to the topic of rescue. They're correlated with, for example, Polish rescuers. They are translated into English. And also all of the resources that are utilized by Echoes and Reflections and our other partner, the USC Shoah Foundation, as well as many of the great resources available through the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, are all translated into English. If there was a student that wanted to go directly to Polish archives, that would probably be a bit more difficult process. Although Poland has certainly become a lot more forthcoming since the fall of the Iron Curtain and a lot more resources have become available, they haven't oftentimes had the monetary resources to have them translated. And so I do know individuals, if anybody really is interested in looking at actual Polish documents in Polish, I have connections to educators in Poland that I'd be happy to share, and they might be able to discuss these topics with Polish students that are also studying this time period. And maybe the Polish students could help them then look at these documents, which might be a really neat continental conversation.
That would be terrific. So yes, and as we were talking about in our webinar on Tuesday, National History Day students become detectives in doing all this. So you can reach out and communicate with people and maybe work through Jennifer, through Ms. Goss or the ADL to find some Polish language scholars who could work with you, or French, or there were many, many, many nations on that list. So the second question I got was, for National History Day this year, we can do groups as well as individuals. What tips do you have for finding groups besides partisans, churches who helped out?
Also,
so I guess we're looking at individuals, if they were going to be looking among some of these databases or looking elsewhere even, what tips would you give them for identifying some groups, a village, say?
Well, unfortunately, and I always say when discussing the topic of rescue, if rescue were more widespread, we wouldn't be teaching about the Holocaust. So there are not a lot of groups as far as actual villages and towns in that sense that acted as rescuers. The village of Les Chambons in France, Pastor Andre Trocmé, who I just mentioned, is one of the few isolated examples, and is Zagoda in Poland. But there are other groups, and the secondary source piece that I shared at the beginning of our discussion on rescue mentions a couple different groups. Also, if you go to Yad Vashem and explore their resources on rescue, they also mention a couple groups that were part of, helping to rescue individuals during the actual era of the Holocaust. So those would be two resources I would recommend to get started. First, the secondary source piece on the Echoes and Reflections site, and then Yad Vashem's webpage, which has extensive discussion of rescue. So great question.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on rescue?
No, not right now. We'll let you.
Okay. Okay, so our last stop for the evening is on our partner page, iWitness. And this is a newer initiative of the USC Shoah Foundation, which is located on the campus of the University of Southern California. The USC Shoah Foundation was actually founded by Steven Spielberg after he created Schindler's List. During the creation of Schindler's List, he was approached by numerous non-Schindler Jews, as the group of Jews that Schindler saved are called. And these individuals asked him to help them preserve their stories as well. And so he set out to create a nonprofit organization, which was initially called the Survivors of the Shoah Foundation. And then in 2006, they joined forces with the University of Southern California, officially becoming the USC Shoah Foundation. And the USC Shoah Foundation is an amazing wealth of resources for exploring the topic of not only the Holocaust, but also other world genocides. There are resources on here dealing with the Armenian genocide, the genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsis. They've recently also added resources related to the rape of Nanking and the genocide in Guatemala. And so we're currently on the landing page. And if a teacher were to want to have their students to utilize this resource, the teacher would need to register. If I were not currently logged in, you would see a register button in the upper right-hand corner. It's simple and it's free. Any teacher can register for an account in iWitness. Once they're registered, in order to give their students access, they would simply go to their dashboard, which if you just log in, it's where it takes you immediately. In a moment, that'll load. I'll also make a quick plug that on both the iWitness website and Echoes and Reflections right now, we also have tremendous resources related to Holocaust denial. And the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum also has some great resources related to denial, and the story of Deborah Lipstadt, who actually took a stand against Holocaust denial. And she's a very, very powerful story. So that's a more contemporary look at issues of the Holocaust that a student might be interested in further exploring. And so if you have questions on that, we can certainly take them towards the end. But back to the iWitness platform, when the teacher lands in this platform, they would want to go to the students and groups. And then once they get there, they can create a new group. And I would simply make a group and just call it National History Day. Once the group is created, the educator is given a key code. I have it highlighted, one of my key codes highlighted here on my screen. And all teachers have to do is give that key code to their students. The students then join and have full student access to the website. And so it's just a way for the Shoah Foundation to monitor who's using the site, but any educator can sign up for this site and utilize it. And it, again, would be a tremendous resource for National History Day projects. And here's why. If you want to give students better background before they pursue topics, say, such as rescue, you can go to the activities component here. There is an activity on here on Righteous Among the Nations. And you could actually assign the activity to your students and have them complete the activity to gain some background on the topic of Righteous Among the Nations before they start their National History Day project. The activity is self-guided, so students can progress through it on their own. And you could even perhaps assign it as extra credit for students and your class. It has them then create an end project, like a poem or a collage, which could form a basis for their National History Day project. But what I was thinking of for all of you, of highlighting even more here, was this two specific features. The first is our watch feature. The watch feature provides general topics. Not all are specifically Holocaust related, but some are related to other general topics like civil rights. So if someone's doing a National History Day project on civil rights in America, we even have visual history testimonies available on that. And then we also have some general testimonies here on rescuers and aid. And students could flip through and just listen to these, getting some general ideas about why people chose to be rescuers. We even have one here on Henry Morgenthau, his grandson, talking about the Armenian genocide. We have one here about someone who was saved during the Armenian genocide, and a couple Armenian clips in this topic of rescue. Nanking, a clip from an individual who fled and was saved and protected. And so just going through and showing you a couple of these various pieces, even one from Romeo Dallaire, who attempted to take a stand in Rwanda. And so he would be a very powerful individual to look at. And then students that are looking at these can either download the clips or save them. And then they could go into another feature of our site, which is also available to educators, and they can create a video project. So sometimes students are really interested in doing documentaries. They don't necessarily have the skills or resources to create the documentaries. This platform allows students to pull in visual history testimony from the vast iWitness archive. The iWitness archive has over 1,200 full-length visual history testimonies that can be searched here. So again, if someone's interested in doing rescue or looking at rescue groups, we have all of these different search hits related to rescue, and they pull up associated testimonies that discuss these topics. And we could do the same thing for resistance as well. And then students can pull these clips into a video. The video project section of iWitness uses the Google video platform. And in addition to utilizing visual history testimony, it also allows students to bring in photographs, music, their own video clips that they may record. And it's a really easy to use digital platform. It can be worked on from any computer, anywhere, and it saves your work as you're going along. You can save it and then come back to it. And then when you're done, you can publish your project and even download it. And so these are just some of the amazing things that iWitness can do. The platform also has a basic user if you're new to video editing, and then it has a more advanced user, and you can flip back and forth as you're working on one video. So it's an absolutely tremendous resource that would be great for National History Day. And I just wanted to share that with all of you and recommend that you take a look at it if you're interested in either learning more about specific topics of rescue and resistance from those who experience them as an information gathering resource, or if you actually want to create a student documentary, this would be a great platform to utilize as well. So that's everything that I had for all of you. I wanted to just open it up to any questions. I see we already have one. Can students do a full 10 minutes with the iWitness platform? They can. I've created at least up to 15-minute videos with iWitness, so they have the ability to utilize that for that specific task. Okay, and file format is the download if students are doing websites. I believe it is in an MP4 format, is the format that it would be downloadable in. I'm gonna just check right now and see what we got. Yes, it does come in an MP4 format. But I know I've needed different formats already, and I've downloaded it in MP4 and then found free file converters online that have worked great.
Jennifer, I think that might be all the questions we have, because we're out of time. So I just wanted to also put in a reminder that November 28th is the next webcast. It's going to be Ask a Performance Expert with our Chautauquan Susie Wolf, who will be talking about both what she looks for as an NHD judge, and also what she does to prepare for developing and producing a historical performance. Jennifer, I can't thank you enough for all your time and for going through all these resources. My head is spinning. I realize how little history I know and how much I want to go jump in and catch up with all of these. It's really exciting stuff, and it seems like there's so many different possible angles students can use to find individuals or groups of individuals who took a stand in one way or another against the atrocities that were being committed during the Holocaust. And in this last resource you shared with us, during the many subsequent conflicts. So thank you so much for sharing that all with us today. If students have additional questions, would you direct them? Where would you direct them?
So I have up on the screen right now Ursula's email, and so if you get questions to Ursula, she can definitely pass them on to me. A couple other really quick points. In December, there is actually a video editing webinar that's being offered by iWitness. It's for educators, but I want to say the date's December 15th. And so on the iWitness website, there is a link that they can see educator professional development. So if they're interested in using that, they can check that out. And I also wanted to mention, too, that in the National History Day theme book, although we don't have enough time to talk about it tonight, there's a project mentioned in there as well called History Unfolded, which has students being citizen historians and exploring how their local communities, what they knew about the Holocaust. And so that's also a really tremendous resource that I saw the theme book highlighted. And I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. Educators, of course, that want to learn more about Echoes and Reflections can contact Ursula or go to our info email on the right-hand side if they want to learn more about how they can use this resource to help their students. We'd certainly love to hear from them.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate all you've done. And we'll look forward to seeing some great projects this year.
I can't wait to see them. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.